We are now moving to Chapter 6, which talks about social groups, networks. It also talks about organizations, but for this particular week, we are only doing the first two parts. So I'm going to be talking about social groups, and I will mention networks also. I've broken it down into two small lectures. I'm just going to do a few things in this lecture. I'm going to explain social groups, define what they are, also describing various types, primary groups, secondary groups, reference groups, and I think the most interesting and important are in and out groups. I'm also going to describe two similar ways that people are joined, but they're not groups, quote unquote, and also explain the importance of groups for the individual and for society. A group is a collection of people. I can also say two or more people because you cannot be a group by yourself. There has to be another person because there is interaction with each other. That's very, very important. We'll see how interaction is a defining characteristic. These groups usually share some attribute, maybe their family or friends or something, but also very important is that you identify with one another, that who you are is somehow tied to this group, and I think that's an important attribute of groups. If we look at these two ideas, I really don't know what to call them other than maybe a collection or people who are together, and you'll understand why they're not a social group. There is an aggregate, a collection of people who share some location, physical location, but do not have this lasting social relationship or identity. For example, you go down the street and you get on a bus. You're sitting there on the bus and you're not a group, you are an aggregate. You may get off the bus at several stops down the line, but suppose one day something happens. Suppose there is an accident, that the bus hits a car, or the car hits the bus or whatever, and you immediately want to help the person sitting in front of you, maybe an elderly person who's sitting or a child, and you have this instant interaction, and for a very brief moment there is identification, there is a sharing of what happened, etc., and you have moved from an aggregate to a group. And I think that really points out how important it is to have a similar attribute, something you share with the group, but also a shared identity. It's not so easy for the next one, category. It's harder to become a group. I can see it with an aggregate, but not with a category. A category is just ways of a characteristic that we use to identify similar people. For example, all left-handed people. But there's really nothing else, and is there a sense of identity with them? I really doubt that. There is just this shared characteristic. So why are groups important to us? Some sociologists refer to groups as the building block of society because these groups provide so much. They provide our sense of identity, our sense of belonging. This is where we pick up the social cohesion that Durkheim talked about. You see, I have a quote from Durkheim, which I think is really important. Durkheim is the one that gave us the term anomie, the French term which means a sense of not belonging, not having an identity with a group of people. And he says, man cannot become attached to higher aims and submit to a rule if he sees nothing above him to which he belongs. It is that sense of belonging that is very, very important. And you can use that, this quote or this idea of a sense of belonging to explain so much of what we see happening, for example, in terrorism, of people who feel alienated from the society, and they find a group to belong to because they felt this need to identify with other people. And so I think that's very important to understand and to realize. Here are the four types of groups that I wanted to talk about. The first one is the primary group. These are usually small groups which have face-to-face interaction, and the ties that keep them together are emotional ties. Okay, now think about this. If you were the coach of a high school softball, soccer, basketball, whatever, team, having difficulty because there's arguments and competition among the team players. In other words, they really haven't formed a group. How could you use what you know about outgroups to make the players feel closer to one another? Now think about that for a minute. How did we define the outgroup? It's someone that you might feel in competition, or you might feel that threatened by this group. So coach, take your players into the locker room at halftime, and you look at them and you tell them, we're not going to be beat by this group. This group is not as good as we are. This group is the group that we have to beat in order to get to, the finals, the playoffs, whatever. And I would be so embarrassed if we lost to this group. And so you tell the group negative things about the out group. You're trying to pull the players together using the out group as the competition or as a threat to them. Now, how have we seen this? So there's a positive to that your players come closer together and work together. But the negative is you've now created a competition that can be, again, positive or negative. Take this now out into society, that people feel their group is the better one. What do we call that? An ethnocentrism, this feeling of superiority. So my group is better than your group. It works to make your group stronger, closer together, but then it creates that conflict with the out group. Who used this? Hitler used it. He used it probably in the most extraordinary way we have ever seen, where he created this sense of German identity and used all of these other groups as a way to motivate his group. Are we seeing that again today? Yeah, I think we are. There's some of this coming back around the world. And so we have to really think about how important in-group, out-group is to understand what is happening in the world today. As I said, a short lecture, but I think it's very important. These terms are kind of basic to what we'll be talking about later in the semester. Social groups are building blocks of societies. It is these groups which give us identity, all of these things. Membership in groups has direct influence on individuals' behavior and their self-concept, their self-image, how they identify. Groups connect the individual to society. If you are alone, there is a feeling of alienation, that anomie that Durkheim talked about. Okay, we talked about 4 major types of groups: primary, secondary, in-group, out-groups, and reference groups.